Hi, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. I hope you can hear me well. My name is Natasha Hayward, and I am the program head for the Global Agriculture and Food Security Program, or GASP. And it's my real pleasure to welcome all of you to this informational session on our call for proposals. We really appreciate your interest and the fact that you're making the time to join us for the next hour or two. And I hope that this session will provide an opportunity for you to get a good understanding of the GASP call for proposals and potentially to answer questions that you may have about the call's objectives, the process, and your interest as potential applicants, which is, I imagine, what many of you are. Just to, I imagine that some of you on the call may be very familiar with the program. Some of you may be less familiar with the program. This is not the opportunity to give you a broad and in-depth overview of what GASP is about, but just very briefly, as some of you may know, we are a multilateral investment program in agriculture and food security that was set up over 10 years ago, coming out of the food price crisis of 2007 and 2008. And our goal really is to help increase investment in agriculture and food systems in the world's lowest income countries, addressing gaps in financing through what we offer, and supporting countries and other clients to address their priorities with respect to investment needs in agriculture and food security. The call for proposals has historically been the main way in which we have made our grant funding available to countries. And by countries, I mean to sovereign governments of eligible countries. This year, in 2021, we're very excited that we are expanding our call for proposals, not only to make our grants available to country governments, but also to invite proposals from producer organizations. So my colleague will speak more about this shortly, but essentially these are small grants being made available to proposals that are originated by and led by producer organizations, farmers associations, cooperatives in our same set of eligible countries. In terms of the format of this morning, after my very brief welcome, I will hand it over to my colleague, Pauline, who will introduce herself, and she is going to walk us through a presentation, a number of slides. I think we have about 20 slides or so. She'll take about half an hour to walk us through the call for proposals, various different elements, including, of course, the application process and key pieces of information that you may be interested in as potential applicants. Once she has concluded her presentation, we will then have a great deal of time for Q&A, for questions and answers. As you can see, we're using the Zoom platform. What we would like to propose for the question and answer session is that we take advantage of the chat feature that I'm sure most of you are familiar with. So we would invite all of you to please write down your questions in the chat feature. I will be moderating that session. I will do my best to keep on top of the questions that are written there, but I will also be assisted by colleagues in my team who may at some point be introducing themselves. We have Darina and we have Tammy from the GASP coordination unit who are going to help moderate the chat and step in where needed. So just a few other housekeeping remarks. As you may have seen, our session is being recorded. That's so that we can make this available offline and afterwards to those who are unable to attend. But just please be informed and aware of that. The session also has simultaneous interpretation between English and French. And again, we hope you are familiar with that as an option. At the bottom of your screen, you should see an icon on the far right named interpretation, which gives you the opportunity to choose either the French or English language stream. So please do use that as needed. With that, once again, it's a real pleasure to be able to spend some time with you today. We really thank so many of you for your interest in Gasp and in our 6th call for proposals. And we look forward to hopefully an informative discussion to follow. At this point, let me hand it over to my colleague, Pauline Svans. Thank you, Pauline.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of you. Thank you for joining us today for this information session on the Gasp 6th call for proposals. Natasha has already given a short overview of Gasp. And so I will talk about the call specifics, the application steps, the call scope and objective, the eligibility criteria, the Gasp supervising entities, which is a specific feature of Gasp, the evaluation criteria for proposals, the application template, submission process and deadline, and then some additional key takeaways and information and resources that may be helpful to you. Natasha touched on Gasp. It was established in 2007, 2008, following the global food crisis. And it's a program, a financing instrument that's dedicated to fighting hunger, malnutrition, and poverty. We've allocated over $1.3 billion in funding to date. And we have done this in partnership with many other key organizations that work in this field. The 6th call for proposals was launched at the end of May and will run through September 8th. The target applicants are IDA-only countries and producer organizations in those countries. We have a funding envelope of about $150 million. This is subject to some adjustments, of which we intend about $125 million to go to country applicants and about $25 million to go to producer organization applicants. We expect that funding decisions will be made toward the end of December of this year. So what is the application process? It's a hopefully relatively simple 3-step process. We invite eligible applicants to complete the Gasp call for proposals. For those of you who have not seen it, the call for proposals template is online on our Gasp website, which also gives you additional guidance on the call requirements and application. You can see this here on the Gasp website, and the URL is at the top, which I will come back to again later. The applicant country or producer organizations should identify a Gasp supervising entity to support their proposal. I will go into more detail what this means later. And then proposals, including any supporting documents, should be submitted electronically to the Gasp coordination unit by no later than midnight on September 8th, 2021. This is a very hard deadline. Any proposal that's received after this time is not considered. We just want to clarify that Gasp does not provide funding to support proposal preparation, as we have done for some calls for proposals in the past, but this round we do not. So it is the responsibility of the applicant to bear any costs that relate to the preparation of the proposal. So what is the call scope and the objective? In the current environment, the call focuses on the support medium to long term for COVID-19 response and for a more sustainable, inclusive, and resilient recovery of agriculture and food systems in a changing climate to help build back better. The overall objective of Gasp is to focus on agriculture and food security, and within this call, there's an additional focus on recovery and response to COVID-19 within the agriculture and food systems. We have in this call 2 modalities, a country modality and a producer organization modality. So the country modality focus on government-led projects that are country-owned and address priority public sector investments, including enabling private sector development opportunities within the country-owned agriculture investment plan. And then the producer organization modality will focus on producer organization-led projects that strengthen the managerial governance and technical capacity of producer organizations as key economic players in the value chain, and to build smallholder farmers' livelihoods opportunities through capacity building and increased access to finance markets and technology. So these are two distinct modalities, and they each also have a separate guidelines and application template. And so I will talk in many parts, the application process and the guidance is the same, but there are some small differences which I will highlight. Within the call, there is a focus on some significant cross-cutting themes. The three priority cross-cutting themes for this call are gender and empowerment of women and girls, climate resilience, and improved nutritional outcomes. So although it's not expected that each proposal focuses in depth on all three of these, but we do expect that at least some of these priority themes will be highlighted in your proposals, either through targeting of beneficiaries or for women and girls, or for specific climate actions or nutrition sensitive interventions. A proposal with a strong focus on any of these themes can highlight this. There's a specific section in the application template that I will talk to later. So who's eligible to apply? This is obviously a key question. So as I mentioned, there are two streams. The countries that are eligible to apply are those that are classified as active IDA-only countries by the World Bank. There are currently 57 eligible countries, and I have, and you can see the list of each of these countries within in the table. And they're shown here by region for ease. And for producer organizations, any producer organizations that apply should be active in these same countries. So the benefits would still go to these IDA-only countries. In terms of the eligible producer organizations, I'm certain that there will be a number of you that have questions about that. So firstly, the producer organizations must be registered and operating in a Gasp eligible country. So those are the countries that I just mentioned, the 57 IDA-only countries. Have a mandate that is aligned with Gasp's objectives, so focused on agriculture and the food system, and have smallholder producers or related small businesses along the food value chain as your primary target audience. Producer organizations for this call for proposals is a little bit broader and does include farmer organizations and other types of producer associations or cooperatives, unions and federations. So long as the members include smallholder farmers, family farmers, rural producers, then those are also fall under the producer organization definition. Producer organizations may jointly submit a proposal so long as one of the producer organizations is identified as the lead. And although international NGOs and CSOs are not eligible to apply themselves, they may work in support of a producer organization application, so long as the domestic national producer organization is formally the responsible lead for the project. So some differences between the country and the producer organization modality. For countries, there can be maximum one proposal per country. So internally within the government, there has to be an alignment as to which proposal will be submitted, and we will only accept one. If we do receive two proposals from any one country, then we will go back to the country to ask them to prioritize one. Several eligible countries may jointly submit a regional proposal. So that is an option, and we have had this in the past. However, if a country submits a regional proposal, they may not, in addition, submit a country proposal. So it's an either or. And all countries that participate in a regional proposal need to be IDA only, so need to be eligible to apply for GASP. Then on the producer organization modality, there is maximum one proposal per producer organization. So each organization can only submit one. However, within any one country, multiple producer organizations may submit separate proposals. So we could, for example, have 3 proposals from Ethiopian producer organizations. That is possible. Producer organizations may not submit multi-country proposals. So for producer organizations, the activities have to be focused on one country. Then I've touched on the GASP supervising entities. So each proposal that is submitted, and you will see this in the application template, must identify a preferred supervising entity that supports the proposed proposal, and who will then, if the applicant is successful, work with the country or producer organization in the preparation and implementation of this proposal. GASP has 7 supervising entities, which are the African Development Bank, the Asian Development Bank, the Inter-American Development Bank, the International Fund for Agricultural Development, the Food and Agriculture Organization, and the World Food Program, and the World Bank. So these are the 7 supervising entities that you may elect to work with. For producer organization proposals, only 1 supervising entity out of these 7 is required. For investment operations or for proposals coming from countries, it can be 1 investment supervising entities, which are the development banks and the food and the International Fund for Agricultural Development. And in addition, countries may select to have a second supervising entity, which would be either the Food and Agriculture Organization or the World Food Program, to provide additional technical support, technical assistance to support the investment part of the project. So in addition to being part of assisting the producer organization or the country to prepare the proposal, the role of the supervising entity really is during implementation. As I said, to help the country to prepare and implement the country or producer organization, prepare or implement the proposal, and all GASP funds are then channeled through
tous
this.
les fonds du GASP doivent être faits passer à travers cet organe de supervision.
Policies and procedures will apply. So I think for many countries, they may be familiar with this if they work with any of these organizations in the past. And so it would be similar to any other project that is implemented through one of these entities. How to select a supervising entity? So generally, our advice would be to build on prior collaborations with between the applicant and one of these supervising entities. Some supervising entities have a greater presence in specific countries or in regions, or they have specific expertise or an existing portfolio that may align with the proposal that you are putting forward. So we would suggest that you build on those existing relationships. Although, of course, you can approach any of the 7 supervising entities to gauge their interest. To connect with one of the supervising entities, we would advise to go through local country offices. Most of the supervising entities have country offices in locations in the eligible countries. And then if you are not able to connect through that way, you can always contact the GASP coordination unit, and we can facilitate setting up that contact. In terms of the proposal preparation process, as I said, I mean, the applicant country or producer organization is responsible for the preparation of the proposal. However, you are encouraged, strongly encouraged, to consult with your preferred supervising entity and involve them in the proposal preparation process. In addition, as part of the supporting documents for the submission package, a letter of support from the supervising entity should be submitted as part of your proposal application. What are the evaluation criteria? I mean, this is outlined in more detail in the guidelines. But just briefly, Gasp looks for effective and cost-efficient set of activities with measurable outcomes. As I mentioned, the objective of this call is medium to longer term COVID-19 response and a sustainable recovery of the agriculture and food sectors. I have highlighted the Gasp cross-cutting themes. And then there's one section on that focuses on analysis of private sector opportunities to justify scarce public grant financing, and that may create additional private sector investment opportunities. In general, we ask that you provide evidence, draw on lessons learned, and demonstrate clearly in the proposal the country's implementation capacity and readiness. Similarly, for producer organizations, obviously, with the focus on producer organizations, small businesses, and here very much on access to finance, improving resilience and profitability of smallholder producers, but similarly, the overall criteria of evidence-based and effective and cost-efficient set of activities are the same with small nuances. But as I said, this is described in much more detail in the guidelines, and I would definitely encourage you to read this section there. The proposal template. So as one of, to facilitate the application process, we have developed a proposal template. You should complete all the questions in the template and be brief, concise, to the point. We ask that the main proposal not exceed 20 pages, this excluding annexes and any supporting documents. And in the proposal template, you will see that we have provided indicative page lengths for each section. These are indicative. So long as the overall proposal does not exceed 20 pages, you are welcome to adjust the page lengths for each of the sections as suits your proposal. We have provided the guidance and the template both in English and in French. However, we do ask that all proposals are submitted in English. So that is the working language for Gasp. But for ease, we have translated it for those that are French speakers to make it easier to read the guidance and the questions. Monetary value should be in US dollars, provide any exchange rates relevant. And then, unlike in the past, for those of you who are familiar with prior Gasp call for proposals, we do not ask for extensive background documents to be included in the proposal or as part of the submission package. We ask that you please use your discretion to add hyperlinks in your responses as relevant, and for ease indicate relevant sections of the hyperlinked document so that we do not end up with a dense submission package. If there are documents that you want to refer to that are not online, do contact us or put them on a Dropbox or another way to share them. So in terms of what needs to be submitted, I will get to that shortly. We do not want all the background documents sent to us. The proposal template, I already mentioned this. It has 5 sections. It's basic data, project description, a section with questions on the context and policy environment for the proposed project. There's one section specifically on the cross-cutting themes. And then lastly, questions related to project implementation, sustainability, and budget. There are in addition 5 annexes. You are required to complete these 5 annexes. They're not part of the maximum 20 pages, except for Annex D, prior GASP grants. Obviously, if you've not had a prior GASP grant, you do not need to complete this annex. The submission process and deadline. I have already mentioned that we have a hard submission deadline of September 8th, midnight Washington, DC time, so GMT -5. And proposals should be submitted, and this is slightly different for countries and producer organizations, to the GASP coordination unit. So for countries, the proposal should be submitted by the Ministry of Finance or other equivalent lead minister. This could be whoever's in charge of development assistance, or for example, the Ministry of Planning. And for producer organizations, we ask that the proposals are submitted by your preferred supervising entity. So do ensure that you contact a preferred supervising entity early on in the process, so that they are aware and supporting your proposal, as they are the ones that then have to submit the proposal to the GASP coordination unit by the deadline. We encourage applicants to submit before the deadline, the reason being that often, or at times, there are technical glitches, and we do not accept any proposals that are submitted late. So to avoid any of those encounters at the last minute, we do encourage you to submit earlier. What does the submission package, what should it include? So obviously the completed GASP proposal. For countries, it should also include a cover letter with endorsement signature from the Minister of Finance or other lead minister, and from any relevant technical ministries that are involved in the project. This can be one letter that has the signature of each of the relevant ministries, or they could be separate letters from each ministry, whatever is easiest in your case. This is not a requirement for the producer organization proposals. A statement of readiness from the proposed supervising entity, that they are aware of the proposal, that they have or collaborated with you, and it asks for a few additional details on the supervising entity's proposal in the relevant, portfolio in the relevant country, and their readiness to support you on this proposal. Then for countries, we also ask a letter of support from the in-country development partner sector working group for agriculture and food security. And the reason being that we want to ensure that the requested proposal is aligned not only with country priorities, but fits within the overall agriculture and food security development plan for the country, that it does not duplicate other ongoing efforts by partners in that country, and that it really is complementary and filling financing gaps in the proposed country. Again, that is not a requirement for the producer organizations. And then lastly, if there are any co-financing partners for the proposed project, then we ask that a letter of intent from those co-financing partners be also included. And the reason is that in the budget, we ask you to highlight any co-financing that you may receive for the proposal. And we want to ensure that any co-financing that is highlighted is, there's a likelihood or there's some certainty behind it. Of course, this does not commit anybody. It is more, it's a letter of intent, and it gives us a better picture of the overall funding that may be available for a specific proposed activity. Then once the proposals are submitted, we, within the GASP coordination unit, will review all the submissions purely for due diligence. We ensure that all the proposals are complete, that that all the relevant documents are included, as any incomplete proposals will not be considered for funding. All complete proposals are reviewed by an independent technical advisory committee. So the Gasp coordination unit has nothing to do with the review. This is done by experts within the field of agriculture and food security, and we include nutrition experts and climate experts and private sector development experts. So it is a broad range, a diverse group of internationally recognized experts that review each of the proposals against the selection criteria that I touched on earlier. The Gasp steering committee makes the final funding allocation decisions, and it does so based on the available funding envelope and the recommendations that come from the technical advisory committee. Any applicants all applicants will be notified of the steering committee funding decisions in December 2021. Successful applicants will then work with their selected supervising entity to prepare and appraise the project. So I just want to highlight a few key takeaways that are important elements to the application process. So it is key that you complete all the questions in the application template and ensure that your proposal submission package is complete. So that it includes the proposal template and all the required documents that are listed in the guidelines. Please be reminded that there are two different sets of guidelines and templates. So please ensure that you use the correct template. So for countries, there's a separate one, and then for producer organizations. There are a lot of similarities, but there are specific questions that are tailored to each specific group. I already mentioned submissions should be in English, and all proposals need to be supported by at least one of the Gasp supervising entities. Without a supervising entity, we cannot consider the proposal. And then the submission deadline is September 8th at midnight Washington, D.C. time. And again, no exceptions. There's additional information available on the Gasp website. The website is gaspfund.org. This includes FAQs that we do continue to update, and any significant questions that come out of this session, we will also include in those FAQs. As Natasha already mentioned, we will make this presentation available online, and you can continue to contact us with any questions by emailing the Gasp coordination unit at the email address provided. You will notice that on the Gasp website, there's only a PDF version available of the proposal template and guidelines. If you wish to receive a Word version so that you can complete the template in the Word version, then do email us also, and we can send that to you. So with that, I will stop and hand it back to Natasha, and we will open the floor up for questions. Thank you.
Great. Many thanks indeed, Pauline, for that very clear overview presentation. I hope it was also clear to those of you who are on the call. But now we do have an opportunity for questions and answers as a follow-up to make sure that we can try and further clarify or provide more information where needed. There has already been quite a lot of activity in the chat, and we have also had an opportunity to address some of the questions in writing, but it may be useful to revisit some of them here. I'm going to try and group a number of them to begin with, and then we will come back to some of them which are more specific or individual. So let me start perhaps with taking on the topic of supervising entities, as we have had a number of clarification questions around supervising entities. Pauline, I'll turn it over to you in a minute, but could I ask you to perhaps please quickly revisit who the supervising entities are, and maybe try and distinguish a little bit between the investment and TA roles that they play. Once you've done that, perhaps you could also speak to the role that supervising entities play during proposal preparation. So that's the period from now to September, when countries and POs are preparing their proposals to come to us. And then their role after that for successful proposals, what the role of the supervising entity is during implementation. So the SE does play a slightly different role during proposal preparation and then during implementation support for successful proposals. So let me turn it back to you now, Pauline, just for some more remarks and clarification on supervising entities, who they are, and the roles that they play. Thanks.
Thank you, Natasha. And I've pulled back up the slide that lists the supervising entities. So as I mentioned, there are 7 eligible Gasp supervising entities, and there is a slight distinction between the 5 development banks and IFAD and the Food and Agriculture Organization and the World Food Program on the other side. So, so firstly, the 7 supervising entities are the African Development Bank, the Asian Development Bank, the Inter-American Development Bank. So those are the 3 regional development banks, the International Fund for Agricultural Development, the Food and Agriculture Organization, the World Food Program, so the 3 Rome-based food agencies, and lastly, the World Bank. So for producer organizations, you can select any one of these 7 as your preferred supervising entity. For countries, there is a slight distinction. For country proposals, you need to select at least one of the investment supervising entities. And the investment supervising entities are the African Development Bank, the Asian Development Bank, the Inter-American Development Bank, and the World Bank, and the International Fund for Agricultural Development. So you have to select one of those 5 to support your proposal. In addition, and that is for investment activities. In addition, a country may wish to include in their proposal components on technical assistance. And to support those technical assistance activities, you can either select to work with your investment supervising entities, so one of the 5 development banks or IFAD that I mentioned, or you may select to have a separate supervising entity specifically for the technical assistance portion. And then you may select to work with the World Food Program or the Food and Agriculture Organization, specifically on technical assistance activities. So this distinction exists only for country proposals, not for producer organization proposals. So at least one investment supervising entity is required. And then in addition, if the country wishes, they can work with the Food and Agriculture Organization or the World Food Program for technical assistance. Then in terms of the role of the supervising entity. So I mentioned that the applicant is responsible for preparing the proposal. However, given that the supervising entity will play a very important role and does need to endorse the proposal and has a big role in the implementation of the project, we do encourage you to touch base and to contact your preferred supervising entity early on in the process. We recognize that there's a lot of proposals in the past that have done so early and collaborated very effectively with the supervising entity on the preparation of the proposals. They are able to provide some additional guidance. Many of them know Gasp well, and you will find that it might be a very helpful resource in the proposal preparation process. even though the country or the PO is in the driver's seat for the preparation. Once it comes to implementation, so for any successful proposals, the supervising entity serves the role of one, to channel funds through the supervising entity. So any Gasp funding that is approved is not channeled from Gasp directly to the applicant country or the producer organization. All funding is channeled through the supervising entity. And the supervising entity is responsible to work with the successful country or producer organization to prepare and appraise the project, and then will support the country or producer organization throughout the life of the project to implement and provide supervision of the project activities. The supervising entities will report back to Gasp on progress and results of the project, and they will be our main interlocutor from a Gasp perspective in terms of on that project. So we work directly with the supervising entity to get updates and share any information, and they then work with you. I mentioned briefly that for all projects, the policies and procedures of the supervising entity apply. So Gasp doesn't have separate processes and procedures for the preparation or implementation of projects. This is the policies and procedures of the supervising entity. So for example, on financial management or procurement or implementation support. So in that regard, working with a supervising entity that you're familiar with might be helpful. So I hope that clarifies.
Thank you so much, Pauline. I'm just going to supplement with one other, to reiterate a couple of points based on the questions that are in the chat. One is just to underscore that for producer organization proposals or submission, they would choose only one supervising entity from amongst the full list of 7, whereas countries may choose 2, both an investment partner and a TA partner. And also just to reiterate that for PO-led submissions, they cannot be multi-country, whereas for country submissions, they can be multi-country. This is just in response to some further questions in the chat. Let me now turn to another topic where we've had a number of questions in the chat, and this is on the PO-led submissions. We had a question with regards to the role of NGOs and CSOs, whether they can submit proposals, and also if they are playing a supporting role, can they be directly funded for playing that supporting role, or should any costs associated with that be incorporated in the proposal? Again, let me turn it back to Pauline for her response on this, and then we'll move on to some of the other questions. Thanks, Pauline.
Thank you, Natasha. So that's a very good question on the role of CSOs and NGOs within a potential producer organization proposal. So I highlighted before that NGOs and CSOs may work in support of a producer organization, but may not submit proposals themselves. So they really, the role of the NGO and the CSO would be to support the implementation of the proposed activities, to build capacity, or support the producer organization in any other way. But the application and the proposal need to be submitted by the producer organization. So NGOs and CSOs are not eligible themselves to apply for Gasp funding. So on the second question as to whether they can be funded directly from Gasp, no, CSOs and NGOs cannot be funded directly from Gasp. Any role that they would play in a producer organization-led proposal should be defined and included in the proposal. And you will see that in section 5 of the template, there are some specific questions that ask about implementation arrangements and partners for the proposed project. So there you would describe what the role is of the supporting NGO and CSO, or, you know, if you were working multiple producer organizations together, what the role of the other producer organizations is, and then any funding associated with the support provided by the NGO or CSO would be included in the proposal, so that the funding allocated, the full envelope, will cover all project activities and any supporting activities, including any work being done by the NGO and CSO. So I hope that clarifies.
Fantastic. Many thanks, Pauline. I see that we have had a number of questions which are asking both about the indicative budget or size of the proposals, and also about the potential project duration. And maybe also related to this, whether we have any idea about the potential total numbers of proposals that we expect to receive. I'll take these ones on very briefly myself before we move on to some of the others. So in terms of the indicative budget, we do not prescribe any limit with respect to the project budget. Neither an upper limit nor a lower limit. I can give you some indicative numbers based on previous experience with the program. So for our country proposals and projects, the average grant size that has been awarded to countries over the years is around $30 million US. I should note that the average size has actually been reducing over time. In Gasp's early years, we had some quite sizable projects and grants. I think our largest grant size ever has been $50 million to countries, and our smallest grant size has been $8 million to a country. But in recent years, we've seen a lot of awards in the $10 to $25 million range. Now, on the PO side, we have much less experience. We have had a pilot known as the Missing Middle Initiative pilot, which the PO-led modality draws many lessons from. And there, the indicative grant size ranges from $1 to $3 million. So we have around 5 of these pilot projects. The average size is probably around $2 million or so. So I hope that gives you a bit of an indication. In terms of implementation period of the projects, again, we do not prescribe any length. I would say in our MMI pilot, more aligned with the producer organizations, those projects have been typically 3 to 4 years, whereas I would say on our country side, the average project length is normally around 5 years. Again, if that may be of help based on experience to date. And lastly, in terms of anticipated number of submissions, we can share with you our past experience for the country-led proposals. Typically, we finance around 1 in 3 of the proposals that we receive. So about a third of submissions are successful in obtaining grant funding. In the past, the absolute numbers have varied, but for example, we have, I think for the last number of years, typically received around 20 to 25 applications from country governments, and we have financed around sort of 8, sometimes 8 to 10 of those submissions. So I hope that may help. Right, let me turn the questions now to one that we had, I think, quite early on in the chat, which was around the private sector engagement. You rightly identified that private sector engagement is encouraged across both the country-led and the PO-led submissions. But I think the question was asking whether it is required or essential or if there is a project that is really focusing on public sector-led activities, whether that would be sufficient. Let me just revisit in the chat so I'm making sure I'm addressing that question correctly. In the meantime, let me also turn it over to Pauline to see if, Pauline, if you're able to address that question on the private sector engagement.
Thank you, Natasha. So as I briefly mentioned in the selection criteria, we do mention the private sector and the justification for any public sector grants being used, scarce public sector grant or scarce grant resources being used for specific activities. So what we are asking is not for an active engagement of the private sector. What we are looking for is, a brief analysis of private sector opportunities, or identifying any engagement with the private sector, or facilitating the private sector environment through public investment, so that the grant financing may lead to any increased private sector investments in the future. So for example, there may be a policy intervention that may facilitate easier access by private sector firms to agriculture or food value chain opportunities. So that is something that may be identified and that could justify a specific intervention from the public sector. This is a small portion of the proposal, or one question that specifically asks to look at those private sector opportunities. And similarly for the producer organizations are already part of the private sector, but we do ask to identify any opportunities that may arise from the proposed project for further development of the businesses related to the activities of the producer organization and the smallholder farmers that they are working with. Natasha, anything to add on that?
No, I think you've covered it. I think as long as the proposal demonstrates that the applicant has really looked at or explored or analyzed whether the private sector can or should be playing a role given the nature and objectives of the project, and that is demonstrated in the submission, that would be what we're looking for. And there may well be situations or cases in a particular context where the private sector is or whether the activities are not well aligned with private sector playing a role, or indeed the private sector is not yet ready to take on that role. But as long as there is a clear analysis and rationale for what is proposed in the project, whether it is public or private sector led, that's the information that we're looking for. Let me now make sure that we have covered off some of the additional questions I think that came in. I believe we had a question about whether supervising entities could support both a PO-led project and a country-led project, I believe in the same country location. And we also had a question around whether if there are multiple proposals coming from the same country, how would we know, or how would, for example, supervising entities know about the range of proposals being developed? So let me perhaps take these on. Yes, a supervising entity per Gasp's guidelines, of course, could support in the same country a submission coming from a PO and a submission coming from that country government. It is clearly up to the supervising entity, based on their dialogue with those partners, as to whether they feel whether they have the ability to support both, and whether they have the sort of the interest and also alignment with their own portfolio in country. But there is nothing from the Gasp side that would present a PO support, a supervising entity supporting proposals from both a government and a PO. I think it's a good question coming from one of our supervising entities about how they may have an understanding of the range of particular proposals being prepared. As we mentioned, on the government side, we do expect the government to go through a process of prioritization, and they may only submit one proposal to GASP. But on the PO side, different POs in the same country may submit proposals. So in that country, there could be more than one PO-led proposal coming to us. We do intend to maybe in the second half of the process, check in with all of our supervising entity partners to try and do a stock taking of the range and potential number of projects that are being prepared. And we will share those indicative numbers with other supervising entity partners so that everybody has a little bit of an understanding of the activities that are ongoing. I hope that addresses that question. I think we also had a question about the nature of the review of incoming proposals, whether that review would be conducted on a rolling basis or in one go. Maybe let me turn this over to Pauline while I quickly scan and make sure we're covering other questions. Thanks, Pauline.
Thank you, Natasha. So in terms of the review of the proposals once they are submitted, this will be done as a batch. So once the proposals are received by the GASP coordination unit, we will review the full suite of proposals that are received, do a due diligence review, make sure that they are complete, and that all supporting documents are included, and then share all the complete proposals with the technical advisory committee. So they will look at all the submissions at the same time. They will look at them together. From the technical advisory committee is independent, but from past experience, we know that they will do a deep dive on individual proposals and then discuss all the proposals together, their relative merits. Unfortunately, due to limited funding available, we are not able to finance all technically sound and deserving proposals. So there does in the end have to be, unfortunately, a ranking for the top proposals that can be funded. And that is the role of the Technical Advisory Committee to make those recommendations and support the funding recommendations based on their technical review of all the proposals received. And so that is done in one go. And then the steering committee decides based on the recommendations from the Technical Advisory Committee, but of course they also themselves will review the proposals and then based on the funding envelope will make a decision as to how many can be funded and for what amounts.
Great. Thank you, Pauline, for explaining that. We do have a couple of further questions, I think, related to the PO-led modality. One of those questions was whether NGO support or an NGO role is mandatory. And another question was whether several POs or multiple POs could work together to submit one proposal. So on the first question, NGO support is not mandatory. If a PO in a given country feels fully capable, somewhat independently of pulling together and submitting their proposal, that is absolutely fine. Similarly, if a number of POs, a number of farmers' organizations would wish to work together or collaborate to submit a proposal, that is also fine as well. I think we also had some questions related to the supervising entity admin fee. This relates, I think, to the prospective rate of the fee, whether it is taken from the grant or the project budget. In general, I think how that is managed. Again, let me see, Pauline, if you would be able to just speak a little bit to the SE, the supervising entity admin fee. Thanks.
Thank you, Natasha. And I saw that there was an additional question on whether any funds are due to the supervising entity for the proposal preparation. So let me clarify. So I mentioned that Gasp does not provide proposal preparation funds. This is the responsibility of the applicant to cover any costs that may be associated with preparing the proposal. However, there is no obligation, and there should never be any requirement by the applicant to provide any funding or cover any costs that are incurred by the supervising entity for proposal preparation. Just to clarify that on the proposal preparation side. Then for successful proposals, the steering committee will allocate a budget for the proposed activities for the project. And this budget will go to the recipient, based on the project that is prepared and the activities that are identified with the supervising entity. Separately, the steering committee will provide a small budget to the supervising entity to cover any of their costs in supporting the country or producer organization in the preparation and the implementation of the project. So the supervising entity costs are not covered from the project budget. They are covered from a separate allocation that the steering committee will provide to the supervising entity after the project has been approved. So the supervising entity administrative fee is not included in the proposal. It is requested by the supervising entity once the steering committee has made decisions on funding allocation. And at that point, the supervising entity will identify what their overhead and expenses will be to support this activity and will separately request a budget from the steering committee. So the project budget will go in its entirety to the identified recipient based on agreed activities.
Great, many thanks, Pauline. I'm just looking through, we do have a number more questions in the chat, so let me try and just make sure we cover those off one by one. I see one that asks whether there are any preferred value chains that POs should focus on. Very simple answer to that is no. We do not prescribe or have any kind of preference list on the value chain. We really try to be demand-led and context-led in terms of, in a given country or indeed in a given region of the country, whatever is the priority there, we would be very happy to support. I see a question on whether POs with ongoing projects are eligible. Yes, I think there is nothing that prevents POs with ongoing projects from also applying for the Gasp resources. There's a good question here about in order for the steering committee, which is Gasp's decision-making body on the grant awards, in order for the steering committee to exhaust all available resources, and if that does not, if the requested amount, I think, is not exactly equivalent to the available funds, would we ask applicants to reduce the requested amount? Actually, yes, we have had this happen in the past. In the past, when we have had some very strong proposals, the top recommended proposals for funding, Sometimes the total requested amount has indeed been greater than the available amount that we have to allocate. And so in those cases, the Technical Advisory Committee, this is the independent expert body that reviews all proposals, have made recommendations for potential adjustments and a potential modest reduction, or indeed a haircut, I think has been the informal term that they've used for some of those proposals. So it is a possibility that in that case, strong proposals, which we would like to finance, may be asked to reduce their amount for the final award. But the concerned applicants would be contacted at the time, at the end of the process, to be informed about that. I see a question, how long is it going to take? I assume that refers to the overall call process. As Pauline presented, the call is open, so the proposal preparation period has been running from May 20th until September the 8th. So we have a few more months during which you would be working on potential proposals, but September the 8th is the hard deadline for submissions. Now, after that, the review process that Pauline and I have spoken to does take a couple of months. As I said, we have an independent expert body that is responsible for reviewing in depth every submission. They evaluate against the criteria that are shared with you, and they score every proposal. And they provide their recommendations to our steering committee. So we anticipate that their recommendations will be made to the steering committee in early November of this year. And then the steering committee will meet at the very end of November, and we would notify applicants in early December about the final results. So I hope that addresses that question. I see another good question. Can GAFS fund at least one best proposal or very good proposal per country? We do not have that policy of sort of equitable coverage. Our approach is really based on the strength of individual proposals received. Of course, we would love to support as many countries as possible and ensure that our funds can be distributed as equitably as possible. But the primary driving factor is the strength of the individual proposal in association with the overall rationale. Let me see. I think there have been a number of questions around whether we can share with you reports or evaluations of the Missing Middle Initiative pilot projects. This is the pilot initiative that the PO-led modality has been built from. We do not have as yet any formal independent evaluation, but we do have some materials, also some workshop proceedings that have been trying to sort of take stock and evaluate in a more qualitative sense. And those materials, I think, can certainly be made available to inform you, and we can put on our FAQs page and perhaps a link to some resources on the MMI pilot experience. Let me see what else we have.
Can I just jump in?
Please jump in, Pauline.
Because I realized that my response on the supervising entity admin fees actually raised another question from an FAO colleague. So just to clarify that, of course, any technical assistance that is part of the project and that will be provided by the supervising entity, so in this case, the Food and Agriculture Organization or the World Food Program, would be part of the project budget. So any funding related to the activities proposed would be part of the project budget, even if this is for technical assistance. And then the supervising entity fee really is only for supporting the applicant country, so for the costs that the supervising entity incurs, and not for any project related activities. So I hope that clarifies, and apologies for creating some confusion there. I have seen a number of questions, I think, on multiple countries for producer organizations. or working with regional organizations. Just to clarify, for producer organizations, we ask that the proposal only cover one country. Often we find that these proposals focus on a specific region within a country or the local area where the producer organization is active. But there should not be proposals that cover multiple countries. So if you do want to collaborate with a regional organization and have support from a regional organization, the activities should still be focused on one specific country or area within a country, and should be led by a nationally registered producer organization.
Great, many thanks, Pauline. We still do have a few questions coming in, or that came in earlier. We did have a question much earlier in the chat about the M&E guidelines for GASP. I think the person that submitted the question has definitely read the guidelines, so thank you for that. And in our guidelines, we do indicate that the current GASP M&E plan is currently going through a process of revision and update, and the updated M&E plan will be released at the end of the year to guide projects which are approved. Now, what I can say is that those revisions are not expected to be dramatic, so you can consider the current GASP M&E plan as fairly indicative of what will be carried forward in the next phase. The updates are really to take stock of lessons to date, to try and improve our definitions of indicators, but also, particularly for the PO-led modality, to ensure that we have appropriate coverage of the kinds of indicators that would make good sense for these smaller grants and for these projects which are really focused around PO capacity and PO access to finance, technology, markets, etc. But do consider that the current M&E plan is broadly going to stand in most aspects, but with some improved, we hope, definitions of indicators and maybe some adjustments to indicators, particularly with a view to the PO-led modality. I think Pauline had already readdressed the question on the potential for regional submissions from POs, which are not going to be supported in this call. I did see another question on any limits to the project duration. As mentioned, we do not prescribe how long projects should run, the implementation period, and we don't place any limits on that. With that said, I would say, based on experience to date, that the TAC, the Technical Advisory Committee, will typically be looking at the realism of what is proposed in a proposal, the nature of the activities, the scope of the activities, and whether the project duration is, in their expert opinion, appropriate and realistic. So I think as long as that equation makes good sense, it's not that we prescribe or indicate a fixed limit. Let me see. I do see a clarification. Are you guys taking written questions only? That had been our intention. So yes, please, if you wouldn't mind writing your question in the chat. We are adopting this approach really to try and ensure clarity and to make sure that we understand the questions correctly. So please do write your question in the chat. I think there was a question on the potential or expected timeline after approval of the grants. So we talked about the timeline through the end of this year for the call for proposals process, where we expect everybody to be notified of the results in early December. But the question is then about what happens after that. When should funding be expected to be available? When would activities actually start up on ground? Again, we do not prescribe anything here, and there is no set timetable. And certainly from the point of view of our steering committee, we would welcome activities commencing as soon as possible. But with that said, the expectation is after December, after grants are approved, there is then a process of project preparation. So from now to December, really you're focusing on the proposal stage, and that proposal will only reach a certain level of detail. After your proposal has been approved, we would then expect you to invest some time in earnest and in much more detail in fleshing out the proposal in full, working in partnership with your selected supervising entity or supervising entities. And that process can take 6 months. In some cases, it can take around a year. So there is a reasonable expectation that a period of much more intensive and detailed project preparation would follow. And once the supervising entity and yourselves have appraised and finalized the project design, once it has been through the approval process of the supervising entity, at that point, that's when the funding would actually flow and activities and implementation would start on the ground. I hope that that clarifies further. Let me quickly skim through. Pauline, if you've seen anything that I haven't seen, feel free to jump in. Otherwise, I'm just trying to scan the chat.
There was a question about consulting with Gasp field offices. So we do not have field offices. You can contact the Gasp coordination unit through the email address that is in the COL guidelines and template. But we would really encourage you for the proposal preparation and any technical matters to consult with your preferred supervising entities, as they will be the ones that will be working with you on the implementation of any successful proposals. I also see a question on the cross-cutting themes and whether the cross-cutting themes need to be incorporated and what they are. So Gasp focuses for this call on 3 key cross-cutting themes. They are gender, so supporting women and girls, climate resilience, and lastly, nutrition, so improving nutritional status. So you are not required to include these cross-cutting themes. We do feel that technically sound proposals will likely incorporate or build in several of these themes just by the nature of, due to the nature of agriculture and food system related activities, what impact activities may have on women, so incorporating a gender aspect, or the impact of climate change on specific agricultural production. So we do assume that by the nature of the activities, these will be incorporated throughout the proposal. And then you do have the option to indicate where a proposal is specifically focused on any one of these themes in detail, and where the outcomes related to the theme will be measured in depth. So for example, if you have specific nutrition related intervention, that can be then described in section 4 of the template.
Great, many thanks, Pauline. I would just also supplement briefly by saying, as Pauline described, this whole call for proposals is being offered against the backdrop of the COVID-19 pandemic, and is really very explicitly intended to support countries and producer organizations to address or to build resilience in their activities and in the process of recovering and responding to how the pandemic has affected agricultural production and food security in particular. And so resilience is really a strong theme against the backdrop of the pandemic. And so we would expect proposals to address that, as you will see in the templates. I see that there is a question, I believe in French, it's asking whether the financing amount could potentially disqualify or eliminate a proposal, if I'm understanding correctly. The answer to that is no. As noted, there is no prescribed minimum or maximum funding amount that we have put in place. But again, it's a little bit like the project duration. When reviewing the proposals, the Technical Advisory Committee will really be looking at whether, of course, whether the activities add up to the stated objectives, and whether the requested funding amount is commensurate with the proposed activities, so that as a whole package, the proposal makes good sense. And so clearly, if the amount requested appears to be wildly unrealistic, whether overinflated or underinflated, that may be a factor that is taken into consideration. But we certainly don't prescribe any minimum or maximum. Right, let me see if we have any other questions.
There was a question on indirect costs of NGOs supporting producer organizations. So with regards to the project budget, I would say that there are no specific prescriptions, but what the Technical Advisory Committee and the Steering Committee will look for is efficiency and value for money. So the reasonableness of the proposed expenses. So with regards to any overheads or administrative costs or program management costs that are included as part of the project budget, we would ask you to consider whether the proposed costs are reasonable in light of the proposed work that is being done. So really value for money and reasonableness of expenses in comparison to experience with other projects. And our Technical Advisory Committee is very experienced in the field, and so we'll have a good sense of what is a reasonable expense, or what should something cost. And there is in the budget annex the opportunity to provide a little bit of a write-up on any expenses where you may feel additional clarification may be needed. So do use that space if you want to add a little bit more clarification on how your budget is set up and the relative expenses. But keep in mind, value for money is really what the Technical Advisory Committee is looking for.
I realized that we have overlooked a question that came in earlier, which asked about the proposal length. And I think it asked if the proposal exceeds the specified 20 pages, whether it would be disqualified. I think the proposal would not be disqualified. The length of each section that is indicated in the guidelines and the template is indicative. But with that said, we would strongly encourage you to try and be as concise as possible and to respect the suggested indicative length as far as is possible. So it would not be disqualified, but certainly it would be, I think, looked upon very favorably if it manages to stay very much within or close to the indicative limits. The idea being that I think, certainly speaking from my own experience, it's often harder to summarize and be succinct than to be lengthy. But we would really look for applicants to have done some of that hard work and thinking in how to really distill and present the information in a way that our Technical Advisory Committee can reasonably read and understand without being overwhelmed by unnecessary information. So we're really looking for you to try to present the best case and in the most, the clearest way possible without unnecessary or superfluous length or information. So I hope that helps. Let me see, the call guidelines suggest indicating a minimum amount needed. Is this mandatory or to help the steering committee with their decisions if the requested amount adds up? Yes, your supposition is correct on that. We would like you to do your best to address that question. And it is indeed, in case that scenario plays out, where we have a really good number of high quality proposals that we would like to do our best to finance, but the total available cannot stretch to all of them with their full amount. And in that case, there may be the scenario of trying to adjust or modestly reduce the grant offered. Let me also scan. I think usually some projects are written for 2 or 3 years. I just want to know the time frame for this one. I'm not sure if that refers to the project preparation period or the project implementation period. I think in our experience for project preparation, 2 to 3 years would be considered quite excessive. We have had that happen in 1 or 2 cases, but normally it is exceptional. And the outliers that we have had in that regard have been in very challenging country circumstances. For example, where there has been a period or an unexpected conflict or instability that has really limited the opportunity for the country to make progress with their supervising entity partner. We would not expect project preparation to take 2 to 3 years. If it's for implementation, yes, certainly, particularly in the MMI portfolio, which is the PO-led portfolio, we have seen projects that were approved that were intended to last 2 to 3 years. But with that said, I think most of them may be taking longer than that period, just FYI. Can one country submit 2 or 3 proposals, but putting a priority? The clear answer to this is no. We expect the country government to undergo that internal process of prioritization before a proposal comes to Gasp. So from the country governments, we would expect to receive only 1 prioritized submission. Let me see, what else do we have? Is it that the co-financing could advantage a proposal amongst the others? No, the co-financing, as we said, it's certainly encouraged. If it is taking place, we would look for the letter to confirm those arrangements, but it is not a factor in scoring or evaluating the proposals. It is something that we track. We do monitor this across our portfolio, but at this point, we do not require it. Let me look ahead. Is it that for country projects, the declaration of engaging with POs is also a necessary document? Pauline, you may have to help. My French may not be getting the question accurately from Usaini. Are you able to see that?
Yes. So for country proposals, the required supporting documents are the letter from the from the Minister of Finance and any relevant technical ministries, then the letter of support from the supervising entity, any letters from co-financing partners. So that one is not required if there is no intended co-financing of the project. And then a letter from the in-country working group. So that is generally most countries have a thematic working group, either agriculture and food security, development partners in the government that come together to coordinate. And that working group, we asked that they also provide a letter of support and just indicating that this activity does not duplicate any other efforts. that are going on. And then of course, the Gasp proposal. So those are the three. So the letters of support are from the supervising entity, any potential co-financing partners, and the in-country sector working group. Those are the three required for countries.
Thanks, Pauline. I see now we have, I think, two related questions that have come in from Mamadou and from Alberta. So I think this is really questions around the process after a proposal is approved and what further steps are needed. So from the GAF's perspective, our main first step is indeed the proposal or the concept that comes to us in September and on the basis of which the grants are awarded. But after that, if you are successful and you receive a positive notification in December, what we would then expect is that whether you are a country government or a PO, you would then engage in a more formal process of project preparation with your partner supervising entity. And that process and the required documentation is really governed by the internal rules and practices of your partner supervising entity. Most typically, it would involve another document, an appraisal document or a project design document that is much more detailed than the proposal that comes to us at GAFS this year. So yes, the supervising entity would work with the partner in country and to prepare a fuller project design document or appraisal document to operationalize the program. And that would be the same for both countries and for producer organizations.
Just related to that, Natasha, I saw a question on, so the funding will only be available 6 months to a year after approval. And I just want to add a little bit of a context to that, as this is very dependent on the proposed project. Some of the projects that GASP has funded have been very complex, with maybe working on irrigation schemes, or where there's a lot, where the preparation time may take a little bit longer to prepare. Other proposals that we have funded are related to ongoing activities. So they complement projects that are being implemented on the ground, and they provide supplemental funding where there's a financing gap. So in the case where the proposed GASP financing is being used for additional financing to an ongoing activity, we have found that the preparation of the GASP proposal is relatively quickly, and it could be 2 or 3 months after the GASP grant is approved that the funding is already available to be used on the ground. So it really will depend, one, on the types of proposed activities and the complexity of the project preparation and appraisal process. And secondly, on whether this funding is being proposed for a totally new standalone activity, or whether the funding may be become part of a larger program or a set of activities that is ongoing or may have already been under preparation. So the preparation timeline and the eventual utilization of the funds and the funds being available to the recipient will very much depend on those factors.
Thanks, Pauline. I do see a few more questions coming in. One, just to confirm, absolutely, this recording will be made available via the GAFS website. And I think we will also be trying to send a link to all participants that registered for the session, so that you may have it as a reference. I would also say we very much welcome any follow-up queries or questions. In case we were not able to address everything, please do feel free to email us, and we can perhaps at the end of the meeting put up the slide from Pauline's presentation that gives some of the contact detail information. Let me see. I see a question on for POs, do they need to have supporting letters? Pauline, would it be useful to, again, to re-show the slide that specifies the supporting documents needed for both tracks? That might be helpful if I could ask you to do that. Meanwhile, I'm just scanning through the remaining questions. Thank you very much for all your thanks, everybody. I hope we have been able to cover off most of your clarifications. Great. Pauline, let me ask you to very quickly walk through this once more, if that's okay, on the supporting documents. Great.
There you go. Sorry.
Okay, fantastic.
So yes, so in terms of the supporting documents that should accompany the Gasp proposal, for the producer organizations, there's only two supporting documents required. So it's a statement of readiness from the proposed supervising entity, so that they are willing and able to support you on the proposed project if it is successful, and any potential co-financing letters. So in the case that there are no co-financing partners, then obviously there would not be any letters related to the co-financing, and then the package would only include, for producer organizations, the Gasp proposal and the statement from the supervising entity. Do refer to table 2 of the guidelines, which gives a little bit more information as to what should be included in the statement from the supervising entity, as well as for the other supporting documents. So on the country side, there is a little bit more supporting documentation required in addition to the Gasp proposal. So a cover letter from the Minister of Finance and the other relevant technical ministries that will be involved in the project, the statement of readiness from the supervising entities, and a letter of support from the in-country development partner sector working group for agriculture and food security, as well as, again, optional and dependent on any co-financing being available, the letter of intent from co-financing partners.
Thank you, Pauline. I did receive another question as to, on the PO-led modality, whether an umbrella producer organization could be the lead PO and submit a proposal. The answer to that is yes, absolutely. An umbrella PO organization, the apex organization for a membership body would definitely be eligible to apply or to submit. And I see one other question on the fact that only one supervising entity is required for the PO-led proposals, and what would happen if 2 supervising entities are interested in working with a PO. I'm afraid we would expect a dialogue to take place locally amongst those stakeholders to agree as to which supervising entity is best placed and agreeable and able to partner and work on the submission. So it is very much that there would only be one supervising entity for the PO-led submissions, and we would expect, hopefully, for that local level dialogue to resolve and arrive at the final arrangement. Thanks, Pauline, for putting up this last slide again as a reminder to everybody. Please do visit our website. We do have an FAQ, a frequently asked questions page there, and we will take some time after this session to update it, benefiting from your very good questions. So it will be expanded over the coming days. That is also where the guidelines and templates for both modalities can be found. And they are available in both languages, in both English and in French. Although just to underline that your final submission, your final template must be in English. So the French language version is a reference document only. Process-wise, of course, you can absolutely prepare everything in French, but we would look for you to translate the final version that comes to us. The supporting documents are okay in French, though. And here in the middle bullet, you'll see the email to address any further questions to us. It is the same email address that your final proposal submissions would come to as well. And again, this should be reiterated in the guidelines and on our website. Let me just check in with my team, Pauline or others who have been helping us to moderate. Have we overlooked any questions? Pauline, is there anything that you think we may have missed at this point?
No. Maybe what I wanted to add that I don't think we have mentioned is that, so as Natasha mentioned, proposals should be submitted in English. We do understand that some background documents that you may hyperlink in your proposals may be in other languages, in French and Spanish and in Arabic or other languages. To the extent possible, if there are English language versions, do include those. But we understand that some of those documents hyperlinked may be in other languages. But the main submissions should be in English.
Fantastic, thank you very much. I'm just scanning the chat. I don't think we have any additional questions that have come in. With that being the case, I think we can wrap up this session. As mentioned, it's really been our pleasure to be available and to walk you through the process. We very much appreciate your interest and time, and we really look forward to a rich set of proposals coming to Gasp in due course. Do reach out if you need any more assistance, but otherwise, thank you so much. And yeah, we look forward to a successful call and for supporting your great efforts on the ground. So thank you very much, everybody. And huge thanks to Pauline for a great presentation and for helping to respond on all fronts, and to the team behind the scenes. So thank you very much, everybody, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, bye all.
Thank you. Thank you, Natasha.
Thanks, Natasha.
Thank you.